and welcome back to the Chargers Check-In. My name is Cecilia, and unfortunately, we do have some bad news for Chargers fans. We also have some film room takeaways, some good, some bad, but there is a lot to go over. So to start with, the bad news, Chargers cornerback Tarheeb Still, who we all know as the guy who has drastically overperformed his draft pick. You know, he's become a really important part of the secondary and also an important part of this rotation, just how they want to use guys. Well, we saw him go down on Thursday, and at the time, you know, he had said, oh, this isn't going to be a big deal, it doesn't feel that bad. But it was apparently an MCL sprain, according to Tom Pelissero, and he is projected to miss the next 2 to 4 weeks. This comes right after the news about Derwin James being in a boot because of his low ankle sprain. That combination kind of puts this defense in a tough spot. So we're going to get into all that, as well as some notes from the film room from the Vikings game, and stuff to think about going forward. Now, I'm going to do a proper preview of the Titans game. That's not what this is, another time. But I also want to say, I know most people who watch this channel are not subscribed. I'm trying to get this thing going. I would really appreciate anyone who does subscribe. It certainly means a lot to me, helps me out. That being said, let's get into it. So, Tarheeb Still went down, and Derwin James is also out. It is not clear when Derwin James will be back. There is a world where he's back against the Titans. I wonder if the Chargers are going to try to get through the Titans game without him. You never want to disrespect any opponent coming in as an NFL team, but if there is any team that they could beat without their best guys on defense, it's probably the Titans. It doesn't feel good, you know, to go in like that when, you know, maybe they had a mind to rest Khalil Mack a little more. Maybe they didn't want, you know, like maybe they had other plans for guys who could get some rest. But because of this, they are probably going to have to play all their guys. Now, Elijah Molden, he's been off and on the injury report, which hasn't been great. I think him playing last week was a really big deal because without Derwin in there, Elijah Molden is kind of the next guy up in the safety room when it comes to communication. And I think they're all making an effort to communicate a lot, but Derwin James was really leading that effort. Him and Deion Henley, I think, are going to have to really step up with communication this next week as they need to fill in for Derwin James, but also because people may be playing out of position without Tarheeb Still there. Tarheeb Still was kind of the slot corner option. They like to have Derwin James close to the ball. They like to keep Elijah Molden back to allow Derwin James to be up. I'm wondering if they put Elijah Molden farther up just because they don't want to move Tony Jefferson around. But Derwin James and Tarheeb Still were really they were the slot defenders, and so without them, you're looking at Jasir Taylor, maybe Nico Reed. I wouldn't be surprised to see either of them out there. And also, the Chargers have been working out a lot of DBs, luckily. The most notable name in that group is Marcus May, who some of you will remember last year. He joined the team, and then that same week, he got an interception. You know, just like Elijah Molden was traded from the Titans and then immediately, you know, got his interception, made his impact. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him out there. But obviously, this is not what you want to see. Tony Jefferson had left the game briefly, but he was able to come back and play. And I think after this mini bye, we can be confident that he will be back out there. And Elijah Molden, we know that he's been dealing with a lingering injury. He had to have a screw put in his hand, and you don't want to see it. So even the guys out there are going to be kind of banged up, and so I think we're going to have to see some of these practice squad guys, which is not what you want to see, and it is so fortunate that it is the Titans next week. Now, like I said, you can't sleep on anybody, but the fact of the matter is Tarheeb Still is out. He's going to have to rest, and this is probably the best time for him to do that. Obviously, they won't have him the next week either, but it is possible that Derwin James will be back. Tom Pelissero had said he believes it'll be a shorter timeline on Derwin James's injury, and it is possible that Derwin James plays against the Titans. I personally don't think the Chargers are going to do that. They tend to be very conservative about dealing with injuries, especially this time of year. I think if it were later in the season, they would likely want him to play through it. But I think, you know, this week against a weaker opponent, they probably have the attitude of, well, if we can't, you know, get our secondary together against Cam Ward without our two guys, well, you know, we probably don't have much of a chance going forward anyways, even with them. And I think they would be right. The Chargers have been trying out a bunch of different guys on the defensive side on the practice squad. They tried out 3 defensive tackles, 2 DBs, 2 safeties, obviously including Marcus May. Hopefully they find some confidence in some of them, so we should be looking out for that practice squad elevation next week. And I still think it's important to keep an eye on that injury report because we need Elijah Molden out there at 100%. We need Tony Jefferson out there at 100%. And it's possible there is a world in which one of them is hurt, in which case I don't know what they would do. Cam Ward and the Titans only have, I want to say, 6 passing touchdowns this entire season. But that's that on that. That's the bad news. And now I just wanted to have a more relaxed conversation about more takeaways from the Vikings game, as well as some kind of off the field locker room discussion. First of all, did you guys see Lad's new haircut in the last couple weeks? What do you think? I think he looks excellent. I think he looks great. It's more of a grown haircut. It's got some sharpness to it. I appreciate it. Do you guys you see the picture of him and Justin where Justin's dressed up as a sailor at the Halloween party and Lad McConkey is a milkman? It's just incredible, man. And I know people are talking about, oh, it's the Madison Beer effect. And I get it. He's in the spotlight a little bit more. And people are saying, oh, it's bringing him out of his shell. I think Chargers teammates have said, like, he's not in his shell. He just doesn't have much to say. And when it's time to say things, he will. But there's something to be said about getting a little more comfortable in the spotlight. I think that, I don't want to say that that's going to make an impact on the playoffs because, I hate seeing people give Madison Beer credit for Justin Herbert being a great quarterback when he's been a great quarterback all along. But I know people are just having fun. Please don't be weird about Madison Beer in my comment section, okay? Let's keep that out of here. But back to Lad. In the post-game press conference with Jim Harbaugh, Jim was asked about Lad's performance, and, he said that to him, Lad is a captain. Because Lad's not one of the captains, but he said to him he is. I think that that's one of those statements that to us we're like, oh, there goes Jim just talking about, all of his players are the best players he's ever seen. But, Lad has had some drops and it seems like it's messed with his confidence a little bit. He's still playing really hard. But I think maybe Jim Harbaugh recognizes, he needs to show that he's fully behind Lad, that they absolutely stand by this guy. I mean, he had an incredible rookie year. He's arguably having a good year now. He just, he has more drops than the Chargers would like to see. And so I like seeing this approach to player confidence being, all out in favor of them in public. I know that there's frustration for how they talk about the offensive line and how they talk about Bradley Boseman and Zion and stuff. I don't know that it does any good to be like, yeah, I'm really disappointed in these guys, and then go back to the locker room where players are like, man, then how come I'm not getting playing time? How come, why isn't there this competition? And, you don't want to do anything in public that jeopardizes the locker room. So I totally understand that. It's not the only approach to the podium. I think like Jesse Minter is a lot more willing to be like, yeah, our secondary needs to do better, or our corner room needs to be able to do this. And I think that's also a valid approach that works. I like what Jim is doing because I think Lad needs the confidence. Justin will always speak highly of him, but I think it means a lot coming from the head coach. Oh, something I forgot to mention that I was going to mention off the top. According to the most recent football analysis video, Football Analysis, a YouTube channel I'm sure you guys watch, the Vikings didn't practice before the Chargers game. They just didn't practice. They did like a walkthrough day, and that was it. Does anyone else think that's insane? They didn't practice. I know it's a short week. You got to give guys rest. I absolutely, the Chargers, I'm sure they had, if you look back at the injury report, Keenan Allen rest and Khalil Mack, like the veterans, I'm sure they rested them. But like just walkthroughs, you're not doing a real practice before a game. That's absolutely crazy to me, especially, with JJ McCarthy on the way back. And, don't you want guys as ready as possible for him? I don't know. The Vikings they're starting to look like a dumpster fire. I feel for Justin Jefferson and the other guys who are doing everything they can to get it together. That blew my mind because my takeaway from that game was, man, the Chargers look great and the Vikings offense has a lot they need to figure out. And now I'm like, are the Vikings just really bad? Are the Vikings just really bad? I don't know. I just thought that was crazy. I thought that was absolutely crazy. And I'm curious, have you guys seen that kind of thing happen before? Am I just out of the loop as to how teams work? I've never heard of that. Another takeaway from a post-game interview, Justin Eboigbe said that after last week, he was feeling really down. He said his grandmother died and he wanted to respond with strength. He said, quote, "I wouldn't be the person I am if it weren't for her." And then he was asked about, the confidence of the team after these losses and the season maybe not going how they expected. And he said, said, quote, "If the mindset in the right place, everything else is going to settle down and take care of itself." So to me, that speaks to, again, Jim Harbaugh's culture. It speaks to these guys are tough through losses. That's something I mentioned in the last video. Like, you don't expect to not go through hard times just because you have a good coach. That locker room confidence is really there with these guys. And I don't think that this is the Chargers' year, to make their playoff push by any means, but I do think that's the direction they're heading. And I think, next year 3 under Jim Harbaugh, that culture is really solidified. And I think they can make some really good stuff happen. And I think they consistently are outperforming their roster, even though their roster has gotten better. Without the injuries, their roster, I would have said, had gotten way better. With the injuries, yeah, it's not that much better. We see what moves the Chargers want to make at the trade deadline. That is rapidly approaching. We see, what can they do in the draft next year. I think there are some really good players at positions of need. I think there are some really good guards, really good centers. I've been doing a lot of, film grinding, and I'm impressed with this center class. And there aren't just great centers every year. That is not something to take for granted. There are good guards, and there are some really impressive edge rushers, as there always are, as well as some safeties I could see falling down to where the Chargers might pick. I think the team's trending upward. I know it doesn't feel good when, you have Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert, so you just have Super Bowl expectations, but I think we're trending in the right direction. Now, part of that is one of the adjustments we wanted to see the Chargers make was their red zone offense. Their red zone offense was one of the worst in the league. It was one of my biggest problems with Greg Roman is the lack of creativity in the play calling in the red zone. It feels like they just do the same 5 plays. It's pretty predictable, and it gives teams a chance to get after Justin Herbert. And I don't think it is a coincidence that Justin Herbert's interceptions seem to come in the red zone. I think teams are able to get more pressure on him. They're able to predict what the plays are going to be. Combine that with the more condensed field, and yeah, Justin Herbert now has a disadvantage going into that. And I think that's on Greg Roman. Now, that last interception in the red zone, I do think that's on Justin Herbert. But, even with some of the tipped passes, because I believe 5 out of Justin Herbert's interceptions have been tipped passes. It's not that that's entirely not on the quarterback, but, we saw it a few years ago. When you can predict what the play is going to be in terms of the timing with reasonable accuracy, you can get your hands up at the right time. And we've seen how sometimes pass rushers will completely forego getting after the passer, and they'll just put their hands up because they know, okay, the quarterback's first and second read are on this side of the field, and it's going to happen at this time. That's something we've seen that makes Max Crosby so effective. He knows when to stop going after the passer and just get his hands in the way, and he's great at it. And so that's something, that's kind of on Greg Roman. And the red zone offense improved. They didn't slow down against the Vikings, and that's what you want to see against a bad team. I talked about against the Colts, people talking about they're not an amazing team. It's well, they can only play the teams in front of them, and they win decisively, right? That they are a good team is what we can take away from that. And the Chargers going against a really weak Vikings defense. I shouldn't say really weak. I think Brian Flores is good. They have a good front. They're good at getting after the quarterback, but it's not like their coverage is incredible. It's good to see the Chargers be able to keep moving. The play action is back, and I love the look of 7 or 8 guys on the line and then going into play action. I think it's so effective, and I think teams know that that's how the Chargers want to run. They want to go out there, and whether it's 12 personnel or 22, they want to get big bodies out there and block for their guys. I think the play action is that much more effective, and I think about this offense is developing in a direction that I think is preparing for Hampton to come back. I don't think they're running things in the optimal way for Kamani Vidal, but he's doing well anyways, and so they can afford to refine this and then get Hampton back, and then also be able to, pound it on those short yardage situations, which, it makes me a little nervous that they haven't been able to do that. I think that's going to make it really tough against the Steelers. But when Hampton's back, I think the Chargers' run game will be in full swing, and I think there will still be a good place for Kamani Vidal. And we'll get more into Kamani Vidal later because he had some awesome tape. There was a play in the red zone where Joe Alt does this amazing job pushing guys back. The second touchdown, he created the entire space that Kamani Vidal needed. Everyone else, they're getting some push, there's some penetration from the defense, but then Joe Alt just takes his man and pushes him into the end zone. He looks helpless. He created all the space Vidal needed. Vidal looks great when he can run downhill and get momentum going. He's a lot harder to tackle, and Joe Alt did that for him. I thought Keenan Allen had a good game. He's 4 catches away from breaking Antonio Gates' reception record. Antonio Gates had 955 receptions, 11,841 receiving yards, and 116 touchdown catches. Keenan Allen's never going to catch the touchdown number. That's just not possible, because touchdowns, that was just the Antonio Gates role. But he absolutely could catch the receiving yards. He has 11,009 as of right now. He probably won't get it this year. There's a world in which he does, but he could probably get that next year. It's just a matter of, is he going to be re-signed? That's the question there. And, on that note, I want to say he is going to pass Antonio Gates' record. We got to enjoy watching Keenan Allen in a Chargers uniform while we can. And that's something, we thought about that last year. Like, we don't think he's going to come back. I didn't think he was going to come back. I thought Mike Williams made a lot more sense. And, we're lucky that he is back. And I do think it's trending toward them re-signing him. But I don't think they have to. This young receiving core, you have Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, Trey Harris is starting to come online. And, I know KLS hasn't been a huge impact, but now with the Rondé Gadsden, you go, well, there's 4 really young guys who are on these cheap rookie contracts. I know QJ will be up for an extension soon, but I don't think they need Keenan Allen. You do have to ask, if one of those guys gets hurt, now you go from a top 5 receiving core to probably an average receiving core. Is that something they want to do when Greg Roman has proven that he is willing to let Herbert just spread the ball around the field? So I do think there's a good argument for bringing Keenan back. I just think he might end up being really expensive. And I know I keep getting the comments about the Chargers do have a lot of cap space next year, but I really think they're going to want to get ahead on some of these extensions. I think they have a lot of moves to make on the offensive line. I don't think they want to be in a position where they need to draft 3 interior offensive linemen. And Mekhi Becton has been hurt a lot, and I think it's affecting his gameplay even when he gets to play. Zion Johnson statistically does look better, and he does look better, but he doesn't look amazing. I think the statistics are a little deceiving, because if you're an opposing defense and you're like, okay, we're rushing 4 guys, we could go after the 5th string tackle, we could go after the 6th string tackle, we could go after the injured Mekhi Becton / Foster Sorrell filling in for the injured Mekhi Becton, or we could go after the worst center in the league. Why would you rush Zion Johnson? That's not the guy you go after. He's been fine. He hasn't been amazing. He's been good. He arguably will be the most desirable free agent guard going into this offseason, but I just don't think he's being attacked the way that other guys on the line are, and I think that's making it a little bit deceptive. Now, he's definitely gotten better at picking up stunts. I think that's huge. There's an argument that the Chargers maybe want to go sign 2 veteran interior offensive linemen and then draft 2. So then you have more depth, you have some sort of swing guard, and you have the guy of the future. And I don't know that Zion is that guy. And on top of that, they're definitely going to sign a few guys on the defensive side. We saw in last year how the Chargers and Joe Ortiz definitely have the philosophy of, you want to be in the position to draft the best player available. If you need an edge rusher, a safety, a linebacker, multiple offensive linemen, and a running back, you don't want to go, well, the best player available is a running back, but man, there is no one in this safety room. You don't want to do that. And so you go and you sign a lower tier safety. So you go, okay, if we don't get one of our blue chip guys, we at least have this. We'll be okay. So you want to get everyone up to that average level first. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Chargers' great cap space ends up being evaporated with 1 or 2 decent signings on the defensive side or on the offensive line. All right, so look, Rondé Gadsden, he didn't play in the first 2 games. He was a healthy scratch, and he only got 2 passes in the game against the Giants. And yet he is still 4th among all rookies in receiving yards. Okay, he is 3rd for all tight ends behind only Tyler Warren and Trey McBride. And that's all tight ends, not just rookies. And he didn't play every game. That's kind of insane. And the more I look at the tape, the more I think he's crazy. He's already facing double teams. They're already giving him the Ladd McConkey treatment where they go, well, if we just shut down this guy, it'll be okay. And I think that's been a big factor in why Keenan Allen has been so effective, is because teams are moving their resources. They already start out on Lad McConkey, and, they're now afraid of Quentin Johnston too, but they're now moving toward RJ Gadsden. That is so huge because Herbert goes through his progressions really fast. If there's an open guy, unless he's getting hit in the face, he's going to find him. And sometimes he'll find him even if he is getting hit in the face. If I were on the defense, I don't know who I would want to double team. He needs to improve his blocking to be considered one of the best. But I look at how someone like Kamani Vidal has improved his blocking, and I think, okay, this coaching staff knows how to teach that. I really think you have to give this coaching staff on the offensive side credit, because Kamani Vidal didn't come in as some amazing pass protector. He wasn't terrible at it, and I know that's something that the Chargers value in a running back, but he needed to improve it. And now, that was one of the things that stood out about Kamani on tape, was that he is technically a good blocker. He knows what to do with his hands. If you watch his eyes, he is picking up stunts that Bradley Bozeman is missing. And I really think Kamani Vidal, just like Amarian Hampton did before he got hurt, he is making up for some of the mistakes of the interior. And, looking forward as, we consider what would it be like to have a rookie center? What would it mean if we have real competition at the center position? Well, a lot of these top prospects, their weakness is pass protection, and they might need additional help, whether it's because of size deficiencies or, it just takes time for guys to adjust to the NFL, size and speed of the game. And they have very valuable strengths in the run game, in calling protections, in, everything else that goes into being a center. It would be really valuable to have that improvement in chip help in the interior. Well, what about on the exterior too? We may end up in another situation next year where guys are still hurt sometimes, because that's how football works. And if Joe Alt goes down again, we need that chip help on the outside. And I think that's absolutely something that RJ Gadsden can learn from this coaching staff. Clearly, they do technical work on blocking, which I absolutely love to see. And I think he will improve that, and I think he will be a top 10 pass-catching tight end in the league. Arguably a top 10 overall tight end in the league. And I think that's a really big deal, especially because, you want to disguise what you're doing. You don't want defenses to be able to go, well, if RJ Gadsden's on the field, it's a 70% chance that it's going to be a passing play. There was a play where it looked like RJ Gadsden missed a chip, and because of that, guy got to Herbert. But I think, after watching the tape, he did miss the chip. He kind of barely threw his hand out. He needed to put more of his body into it. I think he was really concerned about getting to his mark, and he's fast enough that I don't think he needs to be cheating that. After really going through the tape, I think that was Scott Matlock's to pick up, but Scott Matlock had to pick up another guy going around. And if you look at it and you're like, wait, but we don't have that numbers disadvantage. How are we missing it? Well, Foster Sarell double blocks the guy in front of Bozeman. And part of that is because Foster Sarell probably doesn't trust Bozeman to make that block, and so he instinctually is like, all right, I'm gonna block down instead of reading what's happening. Because if you look at the good blockers, Joe Alt, he's able to block guys with one arm pretty effectively, and so he'll block a guy with one arm and then look like his head's turning the other way because he locks down his guy, and then then he can help the guy next to him or pick up on a stunt or something like that. And Foster Sarell, his head was not on a swivel. He didn't do that, and that left the free rusher. And I don't think the chip would have saved that, because that would have required a rotation. To me, that is more on Sarell and more on a protection plan than Gadsden. And yes, this team has gotten better at picking up stunts, but they're no longer directing stunts at Zion most of the time. They're usually directing them at Bozeman or at Sarell. And I think it's having a really big impact on how Justin Herbert can function. I've talked about how pressure in the interior matters so much. It makes much bigger difference than even pressure coming from the blind side, because Justin Herbert has a really good instinct for when to step up in the pocket. And I don't want to see him lose that instinct just because when he steps up in the pocket, the pressure comes from, in front of him. There was that statistic going around of, Bobby Hart played a perfect game and he didn't allow pressures and all that. He's getting a lot of help from Tucker Fisk. Kamani Vidal has saved him a couple times. He's getting chip help when they have, I can't believe I'm blanking on the blocking tight end's name. Will Dissly. To me, Foster Sarell's a little more concerning. He looks really lost against stunts. And that kind of makes sense. He hasn't been playing with the team for a long time. He's not going to be an expert on the scheme. Bradley Bozeman has no excuses in that regard. I know that the Steelers, they don't have the number one defensive line in the league, but they are a well-coached unit, and they are, I promise you, they are salivating looking at this interior. And that's really concerning. And I think we need to really look at this offensive line and go, you know, the Titans have had a few good games getting after the passer. They definitely got after Geno Smith. The Chargers' offensive line has to be able to outperform this below-average group. They absolutely have to. They've, you know, dealt with injuries, and the Titans are an organization falling apart. The Chargers need to win just about every matchup for me to believe that they have a shot against the Steelers. I thought Joe Alt played really well overall. He had one play where he blocks two guys at once. Like I said, he can block a guy with one hand, and so he does that, blocks his guy and then another guy with one hand, and he buys Herbert enough time to get a pass because he turns and blocks a third guy. And all of this is happening on an ankle brace that I would describe as cartoonish. Did you guys see that? It's huge. That ankle brace is huge. His ankle looks twice the size as his healthy ankle. I don't understand how he is able to have such a good anchor and be in such good control as a blocker with this kind of injury. A lower body injury is devastating to this position. If he had to play in a club or something, I'd be like, yeah, he can do it. It sucks, you know, to not be able to use like grip strength like that, but a leg injury and he is still outperforming these guys. Man, I would be embarrassed if I were the other guys going against him, because getting blocked with one hand has to be a special kind of humbling. You know, like that has to be incredibly demoralizing. But yeah, in terms of the offensive line, the interior still sucks. Zion allowed 1 sack and 2 pressures. Bozeman allowed 3 pressures. Foster Sarell allowed sacks as well. It's not good. That being said, one good thing, Justin Herbert finally got a roughing the passer call. It only took a guy jumping off of the ground and headbutting him for it to happen. Where has that been? I also think there was another call that he should have gotten, that a lesser man who would whine to the refs would have gotten. I cannot stand how players act, and the whinier they are, the more calls they get. That's true for roughing the passer. It's also true for false starts. I looked back at the false start at the goal line, and I'm sorry, that was not a false start. Like, he like leaned slightly. He didn't do it in a twitchy way or an urgent way. No kind of way that should trick a defensive player into thinking that the play was starting whatsoever. That was a crazy call. I think it was Al Michaels who was like, yeah, I guess it was that. And then he just moved on. Man, Al Michaels is not a good announcer. I'm so tired of hearing him. But apparently, you know, the guy who did the roughing the passer, Dallas Turner, he's kind of known for this. There was that famous game against Jaden Daniels back in college when Turner was on Alabama. He takes a cheap hit to Jaden Daniels and takes him out of the game. It's just like, man, what? Why are guys like this allowed to do what they do? You know, I know that the NFL is fining players. I just think about how Derwin James got suspended for that game against the Chiefs last year for nothing, for playing football effectively. That I thought that was insane. A bunch of people were saying, why wasn't that a targeting call and he should be ejected because of targeting? And to be clear, that's a college rule. There is no targeting penalty in the NFL. I think that's a misconception just because it's getting called so much in college football right now that you know, there's such a crossover in fans that people think that happens. And, you know, that doesn't mean that I don't think players should be ejected for that kind of thing, especially a head-to-head situation. I think, you know, likely the Vikings were told before the game, hey, Justin Herbert has taken the most hits of anyone. Let's rack that up. Not in like a bounty gate way, just in a, hey, like his interceptions come when he's under pressure. Let's get the pressure up. And some defensive players are always going to take that too far. So sticking with the offensive side, Trey Harris got 42 snaps on the day, only 10 routes run. And that means he's out there for 32 snaps where he is just there as a blocker, because that's how effective he has been as a blocker. That's still a high snap count compared to how many catches he's getting. Like this is someone that the team trusts. He is just down in the progression numbers, if that makes sense. I think we're going to see his involvement throughout the season get higher and higher. He plays through the whistle. He plays hard. He seems to be really trusted in terms of his understanding by this football staff. And I know that Greg Roman has talked about when you have guys from simpler schemes, you want to ease them into an NFL level scheme. And I get that. But I want to see that role get bigger and bigger, especially, as we have the Keenan Allen question, should he be re-signed? Well, we need to really know what we have in Trey Harris. And so far, the tape looks really good. I know that in the preseason, KLS kind of outshined him, but I don't know, people kind of read too much into preseason and training camp and all that. So hopefully we see that role improved so that we can get a proper evaluation of him before the end of the season. We're halfway through the season at this point, and he finally got his first touchdown pass. I want to see him play a bigger role in the red zone, especially if QJ is not going to get that. Although I think we're going to see QJ get more passes going forward. I think this is just a crowded wide receiver room, and she's fine. This is just an opportunity for them to find out what they have there, because, Quentin Johnson will be back. Returning to Kamani Vidal real quick, his pass protection has improved so much. I absolutely could not have pictured this last year. I really couldn't have. He is, like I said, actively looking for stunts. He picks them up at a better clip than linemen do. Obviously, he has a different vantage point, but I'm really impressed. He's smart. He uses his smaller size for a leverage advantage, getting his hands under the pads of the guys he's blocking. I'm really impressed with his technique. He clearly did a lot of studying in the offseason. He saved Scott Matlock from a really bad rep on a huge play to Gadsden over the middle. That's a theme we're seeing, is these running backs really protecting Herbert when their linemen fail. That's a big deal, and I think that's an aspect of this game that it's kind of underrated how that has been improved compared to last year. J.K. Dobbins wasn't bad at it. He made a point to put a lot of effort into it. It just wasn't his strength. He's still a really good player. Still would have loved if they re-signed him. We'll see if he stays healthy for Denver, but if he does, he looks excellent. There was also that Herbert scramble for a first down. That was the one where Herbert ran around to the outside. It looks really fast. Kamani Vidal, he runs up with Herbert. He sees what's happening. After he blocks his guy, he runs up and blocks a guy so hard that he's thrown into his teammate, and he effectively takes two guys out of that play. And what that meant was Justin Herbert was able to get the first down and some extra yards and just run out of bounds without being touched, instead of thinking, I don't want to take a chance of not getting the first down. I better lean into contact. That's the kind of thing that over the course of a season, it adds up. Most quarterbacks, they just run out of bounds when they run. Justin Herbert is often running on 3rd and long situations. And so, he has to stay in bounds because he has to go and get that extra yards. And I thought Vidal did a great job of giving him that protection. That should be on the highlight reel for Kamani Vidal for sure. Let's go off to the defensive side. The Chargers are quietly the 5th in the league for sacks. I want more pass rush juice from the interior, but overall, I'm still impressed with this defensive line group. They have 22 sacks, but I thought Thule also set the edge pretty well. I thought that was a good adjustment from earlier in the year when, a few weeks ago we were talking about Thule's making a lot of bad reads on these run plays. He got 6 pressures this game, a 27% success rate. That's a big deal. A quarter of the time he's getting a pressure, that is a really big deal. And that's what you want to see against backup tackles. Obviously, the Vikings were down their left and right tackle. And how do you play against matchups that you should win, I think is an underrated point of evaluation. Obviously, you want to see how do they go up against the best, how do they go up against big games. But, when it's time to win, can you keep your standard up or do you play down to your competition? And I think, Thule has, he's become a consistent pass rush force. And I don't know how sustainable it is. I think Odafe had a good showing as well. I am overall impressed with this edge room, especially with Khalil Mack back. I still think it's a need going into the offseason. I don't see a reason for them to have Bud Dupree on the roster next year. Overall, this defense plays a lot better when the defensive line is on it with getting after the quarterback. So obviously, the Chargers got some bad news with Derwin and now Tarheeb. Hopefully Tarheeb can be back in 2 weeks. We will see. If he's not, they do have that bye week coming up, and that could end up being huge. I wouldn't be surprised if after the bye we see, a big boost because, hopefully you have Hampton back. If you have Tarheeb back, you have Derwin back. Then the offense is getting close to full steam, especially if Mekhi Becton can come back. it is increasingly feeling like Mekhi Becton just can't stay healthy enough, and I'm curious what they do at the end of the year. They can get out of his contract pretty painlessly, and that's something I know is important for how they handle these contracts. And they have enough cap space to go after someone else. I do think, regardless of if they keep Becton, they are going to sign a free agent in the interior. Might be Zion. I don't know. And after the Vikings game, the question people are asking is, are the Chargers back? Right? Like, are we back? That was a decisive win. Whenever your offense is scoring in the 30s, you think, oh, okay, we're good enough. Your defense holding a team to 10, you think, yeah, we're good enough. And I don't know how sustainable that performance is. The Vikings are turning out to be kind of a mess. I've been a big Kevin O'Connell supporter, but it's not looking good. And while I don't think that the Chargers are really like, I don't think we can definitively say, yeah, the Chargers are back. As long as there is a Harbaugh and a Herbert, there's a path to victory against just about anyone. And the Jim Harbaugh culture is real. Justin Herbert is doing excellent. I don't think it's his best year just because he has had such incredible years before, but it could end up being his best year. There is a world where that's possible. If we can keep Joe Alt healthy, if we can get Mekhi Becton back, I think this offense has a potential to be one of the top in the entire AFC. And that's saying something. So the injury news is obviously unfortunate, but it is what it is. I think the Chargers will be able to find a way around it. Jesse Minter's side of the ball definitely looked better this week. So I thought my cat was jumping off of me. It turns out he just wants to hang out here. Come on, man. What are we doing? All right, now he's just on the chair. I'm curious where you guys feel this Chargers team is. Obviously, we seem well set up for the future with the tight end of the future and, Kamani Vidal showing up so well. And, when Amarian Hampton's back, I'm fully confident in him. But where do you guys see this team going this year? That this doesn't feel like the year for the Chargers to me, but I do think they're a team that no matter who they're playing, that team should be a little bit worried. They have a very high ceiling when they have all their players. They just haven't had the consistency to me, and they're in arguably the toughest division in football with the Chiefs on their way up, and the Broncos having such a just dominant performance this last weekend, against a good offense. They still allowed 24 points, but, you can allow 24 points if your offense can go and put up 44 against a, below average defense. So, the Chargers have a lot to overcome, but I believe in Harbaugh. I believe in Ortiz. We'll see what moves they make before the trade deadline. Wouldn't be surprised if they traded for, another secondary player at this point or a defensive tackle. Obviously, running back is still on the table. I don't think they're going to make any real splash trades just because of their limited draft capital and how they generally handle trading. But I wouldn't be surprised if they went and got reinforcements. The Chargers have had their struggles, but they're definitely buyers, not sellers at the deadline. And I like the direction that the Chargers are heading overall. That's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate you guys being here. Like I said, if you subscribe, helps me out a lot. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for being here.